Ideology above all else. Ideology above common sense, ideology above sanity, ideology before anything else. And for those people, there's really no getting through to them. And you can see the hypocrisy of it. It's just dripping with it. You also have people like that in the media, like individuals at The Stranger in Seattle. And they publish this lengthy, 2,000-word article talking about the woes of a transgender inmate. Now, I have stated, just before I dive into this, my thoughts on transgender adults. If you're an adult, do whatever you want with your life. I genuinely don't care. However, I am firmly against biological men being put in prison cells with biological women. I don't understand in what world that makes sense. What happened to valuing the safety of women, protecting women? We have something called the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I don't think having biological men with everything intact helps in that regard, reducing rapes behind bars. So it makes no sense from a variety of perspectives. But one of the most high-profile transgender inmates in the state of Washington, her name, it's a biological boy, but for the sake of this story not being taken down on YouTube, I will do my best to refer to her as a her. Amber Faye Fox Kim, 35 years old, has been incarcerated at the Washington Correction Center for Women. And that is, in line with what Washington State does. They basically, if you say you're a woman, they're going to put you in the prison with other women. And you can see the problems with that, right? If you've got someone serving life without, and they're a guy and they want to abuse the system and say, well, hey, I don't want to not have sex for the rest of my life. And so I'm going to say I'm a woman. I can keep my stuff intact and then I can go be housed with a female inmate locked behind lock and key with a woman for the next 60 years. So you can see the issue there. So getting to this story from The Stranger, the headline, trans woman launches hunger strike after state moved her to a men's prison. So you heard that correctly. Amber Faye Fox Kim, one of the poster children for Washington State's transgender inmate policies, has now been moved to a men's prison. It says this is the first time the Department of Corrections has ever done this. This is the first time they have taken a transgender woman out of the women's prison and sent them back to a men's prison, okay? So you start reading this Stranger story, and it waxes poetic about this hunger strike that Kim is on. Almost like the bravery of it all, right? So I just want to I'm going to read a good chunk of this for you, because I think you'll be as floored as I was about some of the details that they bury in this story. So it starts off, more than 2 weeks ago, the Washington Department of Corrections forcibly removed Kim from the Washington Correction Center for Women in Gig Harbor, where she'd lived for 3.5 years, and placed her in Monroe, a men's prison. According to the DOC, it's the first and only time Washington has ever removed an incarcerated trans person from gender-affirming housing. Monday is the 17th day of Kim's hunger strike, and she said she will not eat until she's returned. For more than a week after her transfer, which she resisted, the DOC kept Kim in administrative segregation, or solitary confinement, before moving her to the inpatient unit on July 3rd. In a phone interview from the IPU, Kim said doctors and nurses were monitoring her and had given her rehydration salts. The hunger pangs were miserable, she added, and she joked that just talking on the phone felt like doing jumping jacks. She worried aloud about what will happen if she's forced to stay at the men's facility and what precedent her removal from gender-affirming housing could mean for other trans people in the system. She said, this move isn't about just me. Being able to take a trans woman out of the woman's prison for a single infraction where no one is harmed or victimized, that is a horrible precedent to set. So this whole intro to the story, you'll notice it leaves out a couple key things, but one of the big things would be what I believe any good journalist or any consumer of news, the question that you would have. Why was she moved? Right? It's the first time DOC has ever done this in a very progressive state where you can just claim you're a woman and be put in a prison cell with a woman. Yet they forcibly, she resisted, they forcibly took her out of the women's prison to Monroe, which Monroe's no joke. So why, right? Wouldn't you mention that like up at the tippy top? Why don't you guess why? Why do you think a biological man, what do you think a biological man did wrong? What is the most likely thing? I'm not going to laugh about it. What is the most I'm just laughing because Nicole's over there like, yep, they're going to guess it. What is the most likely thing a biological man did in a woman's prison that was an infraction? Had sex with a female inmate. Shock of the century, right? I'll read on. Kim's transfer came shortly after the DOC found her guilty of her first infraction. The agency said a corrections officer in the medium security unit discovered Kim and her roommate having sex in their shared cell. The department considers sex a 504 infraction, prohibiting it along with other acts of intimacy, such as hugging, kissing, and holding hands. Yeah, like holding hands is the same as having sex. I would also note before I continue that there is no such thing as consensual sex in a prison setting. You're not allowed to have consensual sex unless it's like a conjugal visit that's arranged. The stranger goes on to write, but sex is also a reality in prison. During the 3.5 years Kim lived at WCCW, the DOC recorded 33 504 infractions. However, the state did not transfer any of those women who broke the rules, including Kim's roommate. So Kim told the stranger over the phone, I want to be treated the same as every other woman. They would not send another woman out of that facility. That is not a level of troublemaking that warrants this response. In a statement, DOC spokesperson Chris Wright told the stranger that officials do not make housing decisions lightly. Quote, the goal with housing decisions is to ensure the safety of all incarcerated individuals and to provide the best possible support during incarceration to ensure successful reentry into the community for those returning. So again, we are now deep into this article, right? Now we finally know what this inmate did to be taken out of the women's prison and sent back to a man's prison. But the stranger frames this as if this is just a matter of course, that like people have sex in the women's prison all the time. This is no different. Nicole, do you care to tell me one reason why this is different than other instances of inmates having sex in the women's prison?
Because the equipment is different.
He has a penis. He's 35. The inmate's 25. What else can happen different between two women having sex in prison, two men at a men's prison having sex, or a man and a woman having sex? What else is something different, Nicole, that could happen?
You could get knocked up.
You can get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And that is an incredible liability for the state of Washington. It's not even the same. And for this inmate to whine to the stranger on the phone and say they would never transfer a woman out of that facility to if they did the same thing. There are no other women facilities. So of course they wouldn't. They could put them in solitary confinement or something. There could be punishments for them. But you're a man who's been allowed to be in the women's facility for 3 years because you say you're a woman. Well, there are options for other places to send men in the state of Washington who are incarcerated. There are several other men's prisons. So it's not the same at all. Now, so this incident when they were having sex happened back on March 14th. Maybe don't have your kids around for this, but the description at the time in a story from the National Review said the corrections officer found Kim laying on the floor completely nude from the waist down with her cellmate, also nude from the waist down, actively having sex. Kim's hands were on the other inmate's buttocks in a spread open position while Kim's erect penis was penetrating their vagina. So they were having male-female sex, okay? Just to describe it to you. I don't know why I felt the need to describe it to you. You know what that is. All right. So let's continue on in reading this stranger story because there's another detail that you'll notice has not been mentioned yet. And we're 1,500 words or so into the story. I'm sure you're all thinking in your mind what that is, but let's read on. So the stranger references some reporting from the Huffington Post, which has got some documents from DOC. In an email to the HuffPost, DOC spokesperson Toby Hatley said Kim will have the same access to gender-affirming property, treatment, and other programming opportunities at Monroe, and that she has been housed safely in other DOC facilities, because the stranger article features all these advocates saying it's not safe. It is not safe for Amber Faye Fox Kim to be in a men's facility. That's the crux of a lot of this story. So DOC says that's not the case. Kim's going to have other, opportunities for transgender programming, treatment, and stuff at DOC. The stranger says Kim does not tell the same story. She said living as a trans woman inside a men's prison was unsafe, and it involved a balancing act of dangerous male egos. In men's facilities, Kim said men targeted her for random acts of violence and said they wanted to, quote, make a woman out of her. The same men who called her an FAG in the chow hall would later quietly proposition her out in the yard and then yell more if she refused. This harassment grew when she changed her name and took hormones. When she would find a boyfriend, half of them backed off. If she didn't find someone she liked, she said she has made the trade of sex for safety. Okay, let's break this down. As I said, this is going to be an in-depth analysis of this. So this inmate is now complaining they don't feel safe as a transgender woman inside a men's facility. Do you think that women inmates, that all the women at the women's prison felt safe with a biological man incarcerated with them? I know the answer to that is no. Why do we know the answer to that is no? Well, there have been women incarcerated at the women's prison who have spoken out. James O'Keefe did an entire expose on it, who said not only do they not feel safe, they are punished, there is retribution if they dare say that they don't feel safe with biological men being housed with them. Here's a clip.
I don't have anything against them. I just don't want to sleep in there with them. We don't have a voice. We don't have a leg to stand on. Anytime we voice these types of things, we are met with ridicule, targeting, bias, punishment, solitary confinement.
So do you think the stranger has done an expose on how women don't feel safe in prison with biological men? Of course not. But now they do an expose about how a biological man doesn't feel safe at a prison with other biological men? Do you see the issue here? Of course you do. Of course you do. And as those inmates told James O'Keefe, they're not allowed to speak out about this. There's retribution if they speak out about this. There were retributions for the inmates who were found to have spoken to James O'Keefe. The state of Washington won't tell us anything about, they will not provide any sort of public disclosure documents. There's lawsuits over this that have to do with detailing any attacks, rapes, acts committed by biological men in a women's prison. They're not allowed to talk about it at all. They won't talk about it at all. No one will stand up for the safety of the women in the women's prison. But the stranger will write a 2,000-word article about a biological man who doesn't feel safe at a men's prison, who got sent there because he broke the rules, had sex, non-consensual sex, because you can't have consensual sex in prison, with a 25-year-old female inmate, got sent back there and is now on a hunger strike that the stranger is propping up as righteous. This is when ideology comes before common sense and everything else. Nowhere in here, nowhere in the entire article does the stranger acknowledge that some of these same... Nicole, can you pull that same one back up for me? Nowhere in here does the stranger acknowledge that the exact same claims that Kim is making about how she now feels in the men's prison are how biological women have been feeling in the women's prison for years. When they said men's facilities, Kim said men targeted her for random acts of violence and said they wanted to make a woman out of her. When she would find a boyfriend, half backed off. If she didn't find someone she liked, she said she made the trade of sex for safety. You don't think that some women in the women's prison have felt like they had no choice but to have sex with a biological man to be safe? That they felt like if they didn't, they wouldn't be safe? I mean, this whole thing is entirely mental. Now, what's the key detail? What's the key detail that's missing so far in the story? We're 1,684 words in. I wrote it down. 1,684 words in. What's the key detail that's missing? What this inmate's incarcerated for, right? I feel like that's important. If you're going to paint a sob story about this biological man who's on a hunger strike because they don't feel safe, they want to go back and have sex with women at the women's prison, so of course they're going to throw a fit, right? second to last paragraph in the stranger story. If the DOC's decision to transfer Kim stands, there's no way out. She is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder of her parents in 2006. And then they have the audacity to throw in the line. She said she believes that if she ends her hunger strike, she could find herself back in survival mode. She didn't just murder her parents in 2006. She was convicted of first-degree murder. She fatally stabbed her father, Richard Kim. She bludgeoned and strangled. And you know what? The pronoun thing is too hard. He bludgeoned and strangled his mom, Terry Kim, to death. That's who we're talking about here. A cold-blooded killer. A double murderer who's serving life without, and rightfully so, for stabbing his father, strangling and bludgeoning his mother to death. And the stranger wants us to feel bad that he can't live out the rest of his days in a women's prison preying on women, because you cannot have consensual sex in prison, preying on women who, I'm going to go out on a limb and feel like they have no choice but to do what he wants them to do because they're locked in a cell with him. And we're supposed to feel bad for him? We're supposed to demand justice for him? And now he's over at Monroe whining about not feeling safe over there? About being worried he's going to be raped over there? What about the women who were worried they were going to be raped? Who's speaking up for them? Who's speaking up for common sense? Who's standing up for women? No Democrats. On all these other issues, Democrats want to act like, oh, believe women, trust women, protect victims, protect survivors, but not the women in the women's prison. You know, they advocate all these other things: criminal justice reform, good treatment of inmates behind bars, which I'm all in favor of. I think everyone deserves to feel safe in prison. Yeah, even the people who've committed the most heinous crimes, the state has a responsibility to do everything they can to keep them safe, unless apparently they're a woman. Unless apparently they're a woman. Then you put someone with a penis in a cell, lock them in there with them, a double murderer, who already strangled and bludgeoned a woman to death. Is bigger, stronger, because they're a biological man. In Washington state, we take that person, that double murderer who strangled and bludgeoned his own mom to death, who still has a and you put them in a prison cell behind lock and key with a 25-year-old woman, and no one stands up for the woman. Yeah, tell me again how you are the party of women's rights. Tell me again how you're the party of believe women, believe survivors, protect survivors. Give me a break. 1,684 words before the stranger even mentions, and it's a throwaway, that this is a double murderer, a cold-blooded killer, that you locked in a cell with a biological woman who's 25, and now we're supposed to feel bad because they can't eat prison food because they won't. And they have hunger pains. They're complaining to the stranger over the phone about their hunger pains. Should have thought about that in 2006 before you committed a double murder, and you should have thought about that before you stuck your penis in a prison inmate who's 25. How is this real life? How is this real life? And then the state of Washington won't tell us about any of it. They won't tell us about any of it. Like we don't have a right to know because, it would put transgender inmates at risk of outing them? The other inmates know they're transgender. You don't think that every single woman incarcerated at the correctional center knows which inmates have penises and which ones don't? Of course they do. And I'm not saying some of those women don't, consensually say, yeah, let's have sex. Of course that happens. But it's still against the rules. You still can't do it. And it still exposes the state to much greater risk by then having, and this has happened, right? We already know it's happened, by having a prison inmate who gets pregnant behind bars. And then what the hell does the state do? Insane stuff. I am never surprised by the stranger, but this is as shocked as all I think am capable of being about the swill that the stranger puts out. Give me a freaking break.